Hi, and welcome to the 13th video in the GUI tutorial series. In this video, we'll be making a GUI for PowerShell, and it's going to be mostly revolving around Active Directory. So we're going to be able to search for a user, and then we'll get the list of users similar to that username. We'll allow wildcards for that, and then you'll be able to click on a user in the list, and it will load some of the values for that user on the side of the screen, like their name, their employee ID, their title, and also whether or not their account is locked or enabled. And if their account's locked, it'll give us the option to unlock their account. And if their account is enabled or disabled, we will get the option to either enable it or disable it via a checkbox. So in this video, we'll be seeing a lot of all the things that we've seen so far, but we'll be putting them all together into one nice project. And we will also be integrating Active Directory into this project. So we'll be seeing tons of text box, a text box, a bunch of labels, a couple buttons, some checkboxes, a data grid. So let's go ahead and let's actually get started. So what we're going to be doing first is we're going to be creating our form. So in here, we're going to start Visual Studio 2022. Again, we're just going to create a project, and we are going to create a WPF application for C#. So that's just going to be down here and just over here. So let me just zoom in for you guys, just so you guys can see it. So it is this WPF application with C# or Visual Basic. That really doesn't matter in this case, but we're just going to use the C# one. And we're just going to click on next, and we're just going to zoom back out here. So I basically just leave all of these the default because we don't really care what the project is. We are just going to be saving that XAML file. So we're just creating the project here. And then let me just make sure that everything looks okay on the screen for you guys. And that looks probably pretty good. So I might be looking on this screen here just to make sure that you guys can actually see what I'm doing on this screen, because there's quite a lot that kind of goes on in here. All right, so we have our main window here. So what I like to do is I like to kind of hard code the grid with the layout, because I noticed that sometimes with PowerShell, the layout kind of gets a little messed up. So let's just go ahead and let's hard set that width and the height here on the grid. And you could just do that on the left-hand side of the window that's kind of covered by my head here. You can do that there. And actually what I'll do for this this scenario, I think that my head will be better served over here. So you guys can actually see what's going on in the bottom right hand side. So now that we have our grid, now we know what we actually need to bring in here. We will need a text box, and that's going to be for the search field. So let's just actually put that up here. We know we're going to need a data grid, so let's bring that in here. And the data grids always come in pretty big. So let me just adjust the width here to 250, and then the height is just going to be 200. So it's going to be a little rectangle. We're just going to set that to the side here for now. So we have our text box, we have our data grid. Now we just need a few more things. So we'll need a button for the search. You could do it on a change text event. I'm not going to do that just because I feel like it might do a lot of searches and it might just be not very efficient for the search method. So I'm going to put a little button there, but this is probably pretty optional. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add a bunch of labels. So I'm just going to add one label for now, and then I'm going to be copying and pasting them. And what we're going to need as well is 2 checkboxes, and we will need another button. So as long as we have 2 buttons, 2 checkboxes, 1 text box, 1 data grid, and 1 label. Like I said, the labels I'll be copying and pasting them because I find that's just a little bit easier. We should be good to get started. So what I will do is I will start with the text box. I'm just going to put it up here, and I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger to kind of match my box underneath for the users. So that ends up being a width of 245. So let's do that to 250. And that should match up perfectly, and it does. So that looks good. Let me just adjust this button here. So really just want to make it look as you would really like. So here's the data grid. And then for the labels, let me just copy paste a bunch of these here. I want to copy 2, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy paste these 2 underneath. So we're going to have a section for the name, employee ID, probably username and title. So I think that's only 4 fields that we will require. And these checkboxes we could put right underneath, and then this button. I'm just going to put it right here. We're just going to make it slightly bigger. Perfect. All right. Now we have our general layout. Probably sufficient here. So let me just shrink this window size. I'm going to put the window to a width of 700. And then the height, I'm going to put that to 400. Should be good because I'm going to be adding something at the bottom very shortly. So now that we have this form kind of looking as we want, now we're going to have to start assigning some names and putting in the content into those labels. So when our user loads up the application, they kind of know what's going on. And then the names are going to be useful for us for our PowerShell script. So for the text box here, down at the bottom right is where you can see all the properties. I am going to set this to txt username. So the txt is short form for text. So that's, I assign a txt prefix for all my text boxes. So that should be good there. And then for the content on the text box, I'm going to actually change it from the default where it just says text box. I'm going to change that to username. So this way the user will know that we're looking for a username in there. Now let's go to this button here. Now for the button, we are going to prefix it with btn. I'm going to name it btn search. And for the content, I am going to go ahead and put search. And then for the data grid, we will give it a name of DD, or actually just DG for data grid. And we're going to name it DG users because this is going to contain all of our users that come up from our search. Now for these labels on this side, we won't actually need a name for them. We will just set the content. The reason why we don't need a name for these is we'll never have to reference them in our code. You can give them a name. There's nothing wrong with that. I just like to keep the amount of variables that I'll be creating in my PowerShell script to a minimum. So let's set this first content here to employee ID. The second one here, we are going to set that to name. And then the third one here, we're going to set that to username. And then the last one here, we're going to set that to title. And then let's go ahead and let's just set them all to the same width. So I'm going to set them all to a width of 80 and a height of 26. So let me just change that here. And that's just so they're all very standardized. They all look the same, even though the text in them is different. It just makes it look a little bit neater for the end user here. And then we have our other 4 labels. So these are the ones that we are going to assign names. So let's go ahead and let's assign the first one at the top to txt emp ID for txt Actually, it's going to be an LBL because it is a label. It's not actually a text field. So we're going to do an LBL emp ID, and we are going to do the width of that. We are going to set that to 100. That should be good. And then the height to 26, just like our other label. And then we're going to be doing the same thing for the name. We're going to do an LBL name, and we're going to do a width of 100, I think should be good in this case. Let's do 100 and then a height of 26. The name might be a field where you might want to leave it at auto. I think that would not be really a problem. And then for username, 100 should be good for the width, and then the height again 26. And oops, we actually forgot to name that one. So we're going to name that one LBL username. So again, it's different because our text box is txt username. And then our last label here, we're going to do LBL title to contain our title. And that 100 would probably be enough as well. And this brings us to our 2 checkboxes here. So for the checkboxes, I'm going to name them CHK for just check. And then let's do CHK locked for this one, because this one is going to be the one determining whether it is locked or not. And then the content for that, I'm going to put it as locked. So it's going to be checked if it's locked, unchecked if it's not. And our second checkbox is going to be CHK enabled. And then the content for that one is going to be enabled, and it's going to be checked if it is enabled and unchecked if it is disabled. And then our last button here, we're going to name BTN unlock. And we are going to go ahead and put the content to that. We are going to set that to unlock. And let's go ahead and let's change a few other items in our screen right now. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to actually set the checkbox of locked. We're actually going to want to enable it by disable it by default. So at the bottom here, there's going to be an is enabled. We are actually going to uncheck that. We are going to want it to be disabled. We don't want the user unchecking or checking the locked because there's no way to actually lock an account without getting an incorrect passwords. There would be a way to simulate getting incorrect passwords, but we're not going to be really giving that option in this one. I don't think that would be a really good practice. If you want to lock someone out of their account, you should probably just be disabling it and then leaving the locked account for actual incorrect password entries. And then our unlock button, we are also actually going to disable that by default. We do not want to give that option. We only want that option if the user is locked out. And then what we can do is we can actually go to all these different labels here and just empty out their content. This way the user does not see a bunch of different labels. And then what we're going to do is we're going to copy one last label and we're going to put that at the bottom here. And we are going to name this one LBL message. And this is going to be to display any messages to the user, whether it be an error message or a message saying the account's been enabled, the account's been disabled. So now that we have all that done, let's go ahead and let's just change the title of the window. So we're going to call it AD account inspector. And let's go ahead and let's go on the top left here and save main window XAML as. And I'm just going to save that in my AD GUI example here. I'm just going to hit save. And let's go ahead and into our PowerShell window now. So let me actually just go ahead and go into my other machine here. So let me just make this a little bit bigger for you guys. That should be good. So here I have a folder already opened up in VS Code called AD GUI YouTube, and I'm just gonna put my XAML file in there. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to create our PowerShell script called app.ps1, and this is just going to be for our application. So now that we have that, there is a very, very standard thing that we've always been doing in these GUI videos, and that is basically just copy pasting that code that I've showed you guys at the first video that we've made with XAML code. So I'm going to go ahead and just paste that in there, and again, just update my file path. So that should all work. And then if we go ahead and just do a form1.show dialog, we should go ahead and see our form here. Everything looks pretty good. Our search is there. Our locked and unlocked button are disabled, which is great. Everything looks pretty good. We have AD account inspector. So I think that everything should be pretty good to go. So let's go ahead and let's close this here. So what we first need to do, and we can actually see that we've created all of our variables here for those items. So the first thing that we need to do is be able to search for Active Directory users and put them into that data grid, because without that, we can't really select users to load their information for us. So let's go ahead and let's get started on that. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create ourselves a function here, and we are going to call it list users. And let's go ahead and open and close brackets on that. And what we're going to want to do here is we are going to want to search AD for whatever is in that text box. So let's go ahead and start that here. So what we're going to want to do is we are going to want to go ahead and create a filter variable, and we are going to go ahead and set that to our var txt.username, and that's going to be .text. So that is going to grab our text that's in our txt username and be able to use that later on. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and go users equals get AD user. And we are going to do a dash filter. And then what we're going to do for our dash filter is actually do a set of double quotes here. And we're going to do Sam account name because we're searching by username. And we're going to do a dash like. And we're going to do two set of single quotes. And in here, we're going to do our $ filter. Then we're going to do our server is going to be jacked.ca, and then our properties are going to be star. So the reason for the double quotes here is because the filter does get passed in as a string, and because we're not really going to know what this is, we have to use a double string. We have to make it a string already, and then wrap our variable in just single quotes to also signify that it's going to be a string as well. Because we're going to want to allow the wildcards, which is why we're going to be using that like operator. So let's change that from user to users here. And now what we're going to want to do is with those users, we're going to want to go ahead and populate that data grid. So what we've done before is we've already loaded a data grid before, and we have to specify what columns we want in our data grid. So we're going to actually create an array here, and we are going to tell it what columns we want. And for now, I'm just going to do a Sam account name, but I will add columns to show you guys what that would look like. So here we have columns. We just have our Sam account name. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a user data table variable, and that is going to be equal to a new dash object, and it's going to be a system dot data table. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a user data table dot columns dot add range. And we are going to pass in our array here of columns. Perfect. All right, and then what we're going to do is we're going to actually loop through all of our users here. So for each user in users, what we want to do is we're going to create a new array here. So, and this is just going to be a very simple array. So we don't actually need to create an array list here. We're just going to create a very simple array. And then we're going to do for each column in columns, we're going to do the entry plus equals user dot column. So this will actually go ahead and add the value for this specified column from that user into the entry. And then we're going to be adding that entry into our data table. So if you add more columns, it's just going to grab more values from that user variable and add it to that table. And then we add it to the table by doing a user data table dot rows dot add, and we add our entry. Perfect. And then what we're going to want to do is we're just going to need to now set up the data grid to be equal to this data table. So what we're going to do here is do a var underscore dg users dot item source, and that's going to be equal to user dot data table dot default view. And then what we're going to want to make sure is just set that data grid to a read only. So is read only is going to be set to true. And then also what we want to do just to make it look nicer for the user is we're going to do a var dg users dot grid lines visibility equals a string of none. So that should actually be good here. I think that that should work. So now what we need to do is we need to assign this function to our search button. So we're going to do that by doing a var underscore and then selecting our btn search, and we're going to do a dot add underscore click to add a click event, and we are going to say that that runs the list users. So let's go ahead and let's just see what that looks like. So here we have, I know that I have some users called test users here. We actually have some issues. So user table dot default view. So, oh, it should be items source. Let's actually go ahead and let's run that now. That should work. There you are. So we have our TE and then a wildcard. So we pull up test user 1. And as you can see, we can select the two users and all we have is the same account name. Now let's say you wanted to actually show the title as well. All you would have to do in here is add a, I don't even believe you need a comma. All you would need to do is just add the title on the second line. And if we run that here and we do TE star, we now have the title. So you're able to add as many columns as you really want. Now, of course, the more columns you have, the more cluttered it's definitely going to be. But maybe it is useful to have the title and it just is a little bit easier for you to find the user that you are talking to and unlock their accounts or lock their accounts depending on the situation. So now that we have all of that done, now what we want to do is we want to be able to search for a user, but also when we click on one, we want all the information from that user account to load up in here and see what the actual values are. So let's go ahead and let's start that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create another function, and we're going to call this function load user. So we're going to do another open and close curly brackets here. And then all we're going to do is we're actually going to get the user once again, because we didn't store the entire user in that data table. We just stored the SAM account name and now the title. So let's go ahead and let's go fetch that user once again. So we're going to do user equals get AD user. And in this case, all we need to do is search for the identity. And we are going to do a var underscore DG users dot selected item dot, and in here we can see that we already have the SAM account name as an option. So we are going to select the SAM account name, and then we are going to go ahead and do a server is going to be jacked.ca. And then we are going to go ahead and do properties is going to be star, because we just want to grab everything. And that should be good. Perfect. Just shrink this down here. Perfect. You guys should be able to see everything. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and load all those labels and checkboxes. So let's go ahead and do a var lbl emp id is going to be equal to the user dot employee ID. Oh, and actually I forgot to do something here. When we are loading up a label, what we need to do is dot content. Now for a text box, it's dot text. For a label, it is dot content. So you're always going to want to make sure, depending on the type of control you put in there, always make sure to look at the proper properties to be able to reference them. So let's go ahead and let's add the label name dot content is going to be equal, and we're going to make a custom string here. We're going to do two variable wrappers. We're going to do user dot given name, then user dot surname. We're going to do var lbl username is going to be equal to user dot SAM account name. And then we have our title is going to be equal to user dot title. And now here we have to do the checkboxes. So what we're going to do is actually it's going to be if actually we can actually just load that correctly. So let's do var check enabled dot is checked is going to be equal to user dot enabled. Oops. Var user dot enabled, and then we're going to have a var underscore chk lock dot is checked, and that's going to be equal to user dot locked out. And now what we need to do is we need to set that button to unlock the user based on whether or not that locked check is checked or not. So what we're going to do is we're going to do if var underscore check locked, and then we're going to do an curly brackets here. So if it is checked, so if it is locked, what we're going to do is a var underscore btn unlock dot is enabled equals true. Else we are going to go ahead and go back to the default of var underscore btn dot unlock is enabled equals false. So if the account is locked out, the button is enabled, leaving you able to check the unlock button or click on the unlock button. Otherwise, if the account's already unlocked, the unlocked button will not be activated. So you will not be able to unlock the account because it's already unlocked. And I actually forgot to do my dot content up here. So that should actually be good. So now what we want to do is we're going to want to load in this information when a user clicks on a user in the data grid. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do a var underscore dg users dot add underscore selection changed, and that's going to create a selection changed event. So as soon as the user selects a different item, it will execute this command, and we are going to do a load user function. So we're going to execute this function that we just created. Let's go ahead and let's save that here and let's run that. So here we have TE star and we have our test user. So here we have all the information that came up. As we can see, we don't have an employee ID, and that's because this user does not have an employee ID. So if I look up for Murphy E for the project manager, we can actually see Murphy E project manager. We get the employee ID, the name, the username, the title, and we can see that the account is actually enabled. And we can actually uncheck and check that. So that is, everything seems to be working pretty good. And then if we do a test user here, so that should be awesome. All right, perfect. And actually, our if statement seems to not have worked. So what we're going to want to do is actually do a var. If the var check locked, then we're going to have to do the is checked. So we need to add that check here, because otherwise we're just checking if the variable for check locked exists, and that's always going to exist. So our button unlock is always going to be true. So now if we actually run it, we're going to see that the button is not enabled. And if we look at it here, we're going to see that our users are not locked out. So that is good. But actually, if we go ahead and lock out a user on purpose here, so let me actually go ahead and lock out our one of our test users. So let me just try to do a whole bunch of incorrect logins here for it. Perfect, the account is locked out. So now if we actually run this and we look for our test user, we are going to see that the account is actually locked and our button actually becomes active. But if we look at test user 2, our button is actually disabled because it is not locked. So everything is working very, very well. And if we do our Murphy E user, we can see that it is there. Perfect. All right, so what we're going to want to do now is we are going to want to give the option to our users to unlock the account, disable the account, and re-enable the account if wanted. So let's go ahead and let's actually do the unlock account first. So let's go ahead and let's create a function here. So we're going to create a function and we're going to call it just unlock account and then open and close curly bracket. And this is actually a very, very simple command here. It's actually already done for us. So it's going to be unlock -ad account. And we're going to pass in our identity. And our identity is we're actually going to use our var lbl.username.content. And then the server, we're just going to do jacked.ca. And that should be good. And then we are going to go ahead and we're going to do add that click event to our button. So we're going to do a var underscore btn unlock dot add underscore click to add that click event, open and close parentheses, open and close curly brackets, and inside there we're going to call our unlock account function. So let's go ahead and let's see if that works. So I'm actually going to open up side by side with my actual Active Directory here. So here we can see that our test user is actually locked out here. So if we actually do TE and we do our test user, we can see that it is locked. Let's go ahead and let's click the unlock button. All right, doesn't really seem like it did anything. So I would actually have to click on test user 2 and then go back on test user 1 to see that the account has been unlocked. We don't get any messages, and the actual screen doesn't even refresh to tell us that it's been unlocked. So let's actually go ahead and let's fix that. And actually, if we just refresh our AD here, we are going to see that the user is actually unlocked. So it does work perfectly fine, but to the user, it doesn't really seem like it did a whole lot. So what we're going to do is we're going to run our load user function right after we unlock the account. And then what we're also going to do is we're going to do our var underscore LBL message dot content. And we're going to set that equal to account has been unlocked. And what we're actually going to do is we're going to wrap this in a try catch statement. So we're going to do our try and our catch statement with the curly brackets. We're just going to cut this code into our try statement. So we're going to try to do that. Otherwise, if it errors out, we are going to do our var lbl message dot content, and we are going to go ahead and just put in error has occurred. So it doesn't have to be super descriptive, as long as we're displaying the user that there's been an error, that the auction wasn't been able to happen. We are just going to do that. And let's go ahead and save that and run that once again. So now what we're going to need to do, and I'm going to need to relock out that account to be able to show you guys what we just did. So let me just once again lock out that account real quick here. All right, so that account is locked out. So now if we see that it does give us the option to unlock, and if we click unlock, we see that it's refreshed. It already shows us that it's been unlocked. And actually we even have a message saying here, account has been unlocked. So this is a lot more user friendly for the user. So if you're ever doing something on your screen, giving the ability to the user to do something, I would always recommend adding some sort of message field, and then also refresh whatever values you have, just because it could be very, very confusing to the user if they click on a button and nothing happens, but actually something did happen in the background. They just don't know about it. So I would always recommend doing something like that. And by adding our try catch statement, we're also adding some error handling to let the user know if something has happened in the background that probably shouldn't have happened and something isn't working correctly. So now we have our other option, which is going to be to either enable or disable the account based on that checkbox. And that's actually just going to be on a check or uncheck event. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we actually need to create two events for this. So we're going to actually do a function. Let's call it enable. And we're going to do open and close curly brackets. And we're going to do a function disable and open and close curly brackets. Now, probably enable account and disable account is probably going to be actually more descriptive. So for the enable account, we're going to want to call the commandlet of enable account, and we're going to want to do the exact same thing. So we're going to pass in the identity, and we are going to want to use our label and then the server. And then once again, after that, we're going to want to make sure that we load the user afterwards. And we are going to go ahead and actually add a message as well here. So the account has been enabled. Enabled. And then we're going to want to do the same thing here for the disable account. So we're going to want to do a disable-ad account. And we're just going to go ahead and copy paste that identity. And we are going to want to go ahead and copy paste that load user. And then also have a message that the account has been disabled. And now we're going to have to add those functions to our checkbox. So as I mentioned, there is a uncheck and check event. So what we're going to want to do is do a var underscore chk enabled dot add checked, open and close parentheses, open and close curly brackets, and we are going to go ahead and do the enable account. And we're going to want to go ahead and create one more called var underscore check enabled dot add unchecked. And this is going to be for when we uncheck the box, open and close parentheses, open and close curly brackets. And we are going to want to run disable account. So if we go ahead and save that and run it here, go look at our test user 1, we can see that it is disabled here. So let me just open up our Active Directory at the same time, just to actually make sure. And our test user 1 is actually disabled. Let's go ahead and let's click on the enable checkbox. We see that we do get account has been enabled. If we refresh that, it has actually been enabled. If we click on it again, we get account has been disabled. If we refresh it, it actually has been disabled. So everything is working great with the script. Now, the only thing that I'm going to do once more, kind of like what we did for the unlock, is I would just recommend wrapping this in a try catch statement. But there is actually one other thing that I want you guys to see. So if we actually search for a user, actually that seems to be, okay, yes. So as we can see here, we are getting our message as soon as we just change users. As soon as that checkbox is changing, we're seeing like account's been enabled, but we haven't done anything. Account has been disabled, but we haven't done anything. And that's because the checkbox is changing when we're changing our users. So what we want to actually do is actually only display that message if the user, so we only want to enable the account if the account's disabled, and we only want to disable the account if the account's enabled. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to do an if statement here and do an if. And actually what we need to do is grab that user once again. So we're going to go ahead and grab the user in both options here. And we are going to say if user dot enabled equal false in this case, because we are re-enabling the account, we are going to do these actions. And then what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this whole thing in a try catch block. So let's do a try and then a catch. Just redo that here. And then we're going to do our var underscore LBL message dot content. And we're just actually going to copy paste this whole thing here, just saying that an error has occurred. And we're going to go ahead and do the exact same thing here, but in this case, we're going to do just if user dot enabled. So if the user is actually enabled, we're going to go ahead and we are going to disable the account. And once again, we are going to wrap that around in a try catch block here. And let's just display that error message if we encounter an error. Let's go ahead and let's save that and let's run that again. So if we do our test users here, we see that the test user 1 is still disabled. We go to test user 2, it's enabled. To test user 1, it's disabled. And we're not getting that message, but if we go ahead and re-enable our test user 1, we can see that the account has been re-enabled. And let's just go check in our Active Directory here. And we can see that the user is actually well said of being enabled. And if we disable it, we can see that the account has been disabled. The account has been disabled. And if we go into test user 2, we can still see that we have our message here. So that would be the only other thing that I would say is if you're ever loading a user, it might actually be good as well to just do a var lbl message dot content and just reset that to empty. And now if we run that again and we do te dollars wildcard, we can see that we can enable. If we go here, everything is working great. If we disable it, we can see that we're back to enabled, but we have no message. We still have no message, so we can switch between them. If we do enable, we see our message for enabled, we see disabled, and then the message disappears if we go to another user. So as you can see, the power of this is definitely very, very great. You guys can add as many features as you want here. You can even do a password reset option right here. Let someone type in a password and hit reset password, or maybe just generate a button that says reset password, and then it'll give you a randomly generated password and tell you on the screen what that password is, and you can give that to the user. This way it doesn't give the option to the person behind the desk to type in a very easy password. You can generate something. We've seen that in a previous video of how to generate passwords, so you can use that in this video as well. So this was purely using PowerShell. Now we are currently working on a C# series where we'll be actually integrating some REST-PS APIs. Once we get far enough in C# and we start designing GUI applications in C#, we can actually call upon our REST-PS commands and do a lot more variety of things with PowerShell and C# combined together. Kind of makes a little bit more powerful applications that way with a lot less code in the background. It's a little bit more work with the REST-PS, but you can definitely get a lot more out of that, and you're not limited to just that application, because then those APIs are available for tons more. So that is pretty much it for this video. I hope that kind of answers your questions to Script Nerds. It was his request for this video to have a little bit more of an in-depth GUI tutorial with Active Directory and the ability to enable or disable the account with the checkbox. So if you guys have any questions or topics that you guys would like to see a video on, if I think that it would be a huge benefit to the community, I will definitely be doing a video on it. If it's something that's a little bit more specific, I will definitely be answering your questions. So just leave them down below. Make sure to subscribe and hit that like button, and make sure to also hit that notification bell to be notified when the next video comes out. And I will see you guys on the next video.